I think we'll make a start. Good morning, everyone. I think we'll get straight into the agenda. Do we have any apologies, please?
Yes, we have 3 apologies for this morning's meeting. It's Councillor Jason Jones, Councillor Jill Waring and Councillor Janet Eagland.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? Item 3 then, the minutes of the Safeguarding Overview and Scrutiny meeting held on the 3rd of August. I could just extend my thanks to Richard for chairing that particular meeting. If I go through them just for accuracy to start off with, you'll find them on page 1. I assume everyone has read them. Page 2, page 3, and page 4. Does everyone agree they're a true and accurate record of the meeting that took place? Thank you. I'll sign those now. Thank you very much. Moving on then to one of the main agenda items of today, item 4, Adult Safeguarding Transformation Project, which you will see the report on page 5. And I think we have Ruth Martin who's going to take us through that. I don't know if the Cabinet member wants to make any comment first, or shall we go straight into the report?
I'm happy to make a few remarks before Ruth starts, if I may. As you can see from the report, there's been a 63% increase in the 3 years up to 2019 in referrals, and that rate of increase is unsustainable in the long run unless we take some measures to deal with it. It's a UK-wide phenomenon. It's not just exclusive to us. And people have cottoned on to the fact that they can refer, basically. I think that's the point. I take some comfort from the triage system that we've got to make sure that those who are particularly vulnerable are dealt with quickly. They're assessed by the Staffordshire Adult Safeguarding Team on the day of referral, and a principal social worker in consultation with MAT, the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, comes to a view. And so despite the numbers, I'm satisfied that people are kept safe. You will see that when Ruth goes through the report, which is quite involved, we address capacity, we become more proactive and preemptive, we manage systems better internally, and we're doing more audit and looking at key performance indicators. So with that in mind, I will pass you over to Ruth, who's the Adult Safeguarding Team Lead. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here today. I hope that the report has given you some insight, and I hope just to go through it now in a little bit more detail, and then happy, obviously, to take questions about it afterwards. Okay, so if we move on to the next slide. Thanks, Helen. Okay, so I thought what would be useful is just to look at what the current context is around adult safeguarding, or certainly what it has been prior to us commencing this transformation work. What we would like to do, what we're unable to do, is make the required inquiries at the moment for each concern because of the high number of referrals that we have coming through. Trying to deal with that in a considered approach has been quite difficult given the limited resources that we've had. We've been having to take some what would be classed almost as shortcut methods to manage the demand. And that always raises some concerns with regards to the possibility of missing information at times. And it's something that we're really keen on ensuring that we don't. Whilst we do try and put in every check and balance that we can with multiple checking points, we actually have created quite an industry of reprioritising to try and handle over recent months that amount coming through. As we've said, there have been we've got numerous inboxes and thousands of emails that come through at various points, information, requests for updates. It makes it very difficult sometimes, and I'm going to use the phrase, to see the wood for the trees at times. And what we want to make sure is that the advanced practitioners at that very front end have the information that they need at that earliest stage to make the best decision for the adult that they can, to make sure that we're keeping people as safe as possible. We also currently have a slower response time than we would like. We would like to be able to manage all referrals within 2 weeks, so that actually nothing sits within the safeguarding team within the MASH for more than 2 weeks. Now, as has already been said by Councillor McMahon, we are actually reviewing all concerns on the day it's received. That's been throughout this time. So anything that is high risk, requiring immediate response, I would offer you that assurance that that is done on the day that it's been identified, and we don't have delays in that respect. However, I take that even something that may be lower risk compared to others can be significant to the adult themselves, and we can't lose sight of the importance of making sure that we address all of the concerns, not just those that are higher risk. What we would like to be able to do is become less responsive and more proactive, because at the moment we are very much crisis management rather than being proactive. And I think we can all agree that being able to respond earlier to prevent further deterioration is better for all, and certainly better for the adults who are most at risk. So our processes, because of the way that we work, are highly complex. And inducting new people on the team, I smile just because it's so easy from a social work perspective to be looking at reading and making decisions, but the process that we've put around that is actually lengthy and can be quite complex. So what we've tried to do, and what we're hoping to do through the transformation work, is simplify that out to make sure we're spending the most time looking at the needs of the adults rather than the administrative functions of our service. Okay, Helen, if we can move on to the next slide, thanks. So I know this has already been mooted, the increase that we have had over the last few years. And yes, it has gone up by 63%, which is obviously significant and isn't something that you can necessarily plan for. The resource within the team, as in the numbers of advanced practitioners, has remained relatively stable over that time, where we've bolstered when we've needed to with periods, which is the case at the moment, with agency staff. But I think we can all appreciate that what we need is stability within a team. And as I've said, because our systems can be complex, it takes time to induct people into our team and to make sure that they are able to manage that effectively. What we have been able to do, though, is we've been able to look at these numbers, and I know this is, these numbers show actually the amount of work that actually the team within the MASH actually deals with wholeheartedly without it needing to go out for further inquiries. Now, we deal up to 86.3% of all inquiries that come through, or all concerns that come through, are dealt with by the team in its entirety. So they will have looked at it, risk assessed it, taken necessary steps, and then hopefully been able to resolve the safeguarding concern. That doesn't mean, though, that that person maybe doesn't require a review of their adult social care or a new assessment. The safeguarding element of it has been dealt with in its entirety by the team. At its lowest, it's 69.7%, so we are able to take out of our wider system that amount at any one time. So it does go to show that actually when we can work and work effectively, we are able to keep quite a high proportion of work going into our district teams. the numbers underneath for MPFT. MPFT will pick up out of those inquiries left over up to 26.1% of those to deal with further and ongoing inquiries. ALDT, 4.1% up to 4.1%, and ASSET, which is my other service, which is the Adult Safeguarding Inquiry Team, who deal with high-risk and complex cases. They manage 3.6% of all cases as well. So for me, it's about ensuring that we're not increasing the demand into the district teams, that we're able to manage risk effectively as we can at that very front end. You will see that even though we have had an increase in concerns being raised, we're actually not increasing the numbers that require a full Section 42 inquiry. Now, this doesn't actually mean that the new concerns we've had coming through are inappropriate. It just means that we're able to take those necessary steps to ensure that there are appropriate measures in place to reduce the ongoing risk. We only need an inquiry where ongoing risk remains and the adult remains at risk of abuse and neglect. Thank you, Helen. So, what do we need to achieve? We need to, and this is really hard for me because this doesn't come naturally, but I'm learning, to embrace and utilise our digital solutions, to look at what we've got, what actually our computer systems are able to do. But actually some of these things can be very much time-saving rather than leaving it to the person to do, rather than leaving it to a practitioner to try and muddle through. We need to be able to improve our responsiveness. And for me, as I've said, is really key. I don't mind how many things we have coming through, how many concerns we have coming through, or how many concerns are sat with my team if they're being dealt with in a timely way. If these things are sitting with us for long periods of time, which I'll be honest with you, at the moment they are, some of them are, that to me is where we have the most problems because people aren't necessarily getting that response that they need. And to be able to do that, we need to be shifting more to that proactive way of safeguarding. And I don't mean going out there and looking for problems before they come, but about educating people and working with our providers to make sure that people are far more aware as well as to what their responsibility are. That we are, as an organisation, able to identify potential concerns earlier on by being able to review concerns that we've had through, to look for patterns in behaviour in various organisations, etc. It's about having that clearer safeguarding pathway. As I've said, our system was quite complex. We did bits, we didn't do other bits. It got very confusing. So what we're trying to do now is simplify that out. So we've got clear lines of responsibility for different teams. So everybody knows the part they have to play, and that actually then we can avoid that back and forth of discussion and sometimes debate that goes on between who's responsible. And for me, that's a real key part because that often leads to delay and potentially somebody not getting a response. I believe by doing that, we'll be able to further integrate safeguarding into that wider context of adult social care. It seems strange for me to sit here and say that it's seen as a separate entity when it forms part of the Care Act. However, in some ways, because we've separated it out, we've then separated it out practically as well as just in a process. So we need to change that and make sure that people's day-to-day practice within adult social care is addressing areas of safeguarding so that then actually our ongoing risks to adults is reduced. And by improving our ability to respond, we'll be able to improve the quality of decisions that we're making. If we have the time to be able to look at previous concerns, if we've got the time to gather relevant information, our quality of decision making for the adult at that very front end will be greatly improved. And as well then we'll be able to increase that capacity to meet future demand, because if we do continue to increase the rate of referral as we are at the moment, we well, I know that in another 3 years' time, we will not be able to manage. So to be able to future-proof this, we need to look now and make sure we've got the right system in place and also the right processes in place to be able to manage increasing demand. Okay, thank you, Helen. So hopefully you've been able to read some of these, so I'm going to try not to go into too much detail because some of it is very much what we do and I don't want to confuse people with names of forms, etc. It's helpful for me and helpful for my teams and for the area teams, but it might just, I don't want to baffle people or overwhelm people. But for the top level way of looking at some of these things, as I've said, we have to be looking at what we do digitally. We have to be looking at the way that our forms work and the way that our computer system works. As you're all aware, we've recently had an update in the Care Director system. Previously, all adult safeguarding concerns were raised onto a form which required a person to have a case record, have a referral, which required lots of screens to be opened and then subsequently closed down. What we've done is simplify that to place it as a contact, which I will assure you all covers exactly the same information as the AS1 form, but actually by changing at what point it's recorded in the system, what we've been able to do is reduce the administrative time required to manage that for the advanced practitioners. So rather than spending 20 minutes per referral on administrative functions, they're now spending 5, which, as you can appreciate then, means that for every one AS1 we were closing, we can close up to 3 contacts. It means we're not reducing the time spent looking at the detail and making the decision, just the administrative function associated with that. But actually what that's done in a positive way is enable us to be able to capture better what we've actually got coming through. Because what we found is that a number of concerns that were closed down at very early stages weren't actually being recorded in our numbers. So even though we knew we had them coming through, what we were reporting were very different numbers. And you'll most probably see that over the coming year when you see the information coming out from our safeguarding board as well, with the changes that that's made. Again, as I've mentioned, we had multiple inboxes, so multiple email addresses and accounts where lots of emails came into, and then we sorted them. It was a beautiful colour code. It was my baby, if I'm honest. But what we've been able to do now is remove that and work from Care Director itself. This means we're reducing the risk of things getting lost or missed. We are able to risk assess and prioritise more effectively because we can clearly identify those that have come through as high risk. We're not having to go into multiple emails to see what's happening. We're going straight into the system itself. So it's reducing some of that duplication that we've been doing. And that actually makes everything far easier for us to be able to manage, and certainly for me as a manager to be able to review how the team is performing at that moment. I don't have to wait for a report at the end of the month. I can see on my dashboard as the manager how the team is performing and whether we've got any significant delays. We've also been looking at reducing the further forms. Down we have, you might have heard me talk before, we had an AS2, an AS3, an AS4, all the way up to an AS7, and we're combining those into one form. And actually what that will do is integrate safeguarding more into practice. We were so process-driven that we moved away from what the adult needed, and we were just almost concerned with filling in the correct form. And what we needed to make sure is that what we're doing is right for the adult and that we're recording that effectively. And for me, as I've said, the most important part of this is about us being proactive. So being able to record data more effectively, being able to see the information on our systems, recording against each provider the number of concerns that we've got, might seem a real minor change, but for me is actually a really significant change. Unless I was to go and do individual searches, multiple searches, it would take my administrative team hours to build me up spreadsheets, etc., to identify the concerns that we've had coming through for providers, etc. So we very rarely did it because we only did it when a concern was identified. But what this will enable us to do is just go into a provider, be able to see on their front screen how many concerns have come through, how many have been closed down. What that will then do is identify if we've started to get a pattern, or actually, for me, if a provider has made no safeguarding referrals, which in itself would be just as concerning as if we had 20. So being able to monitor that will mean that we'll be able to go in there, have a look, meet with providers and be able to give them the support that they need. And we do that in conjunction with our quality assurance team, who we work very closely with. So if the concerns aren't meeting our threshold for safeguarding, but actually they are causing concern about the provider as a whole, we can then share that information far more readily with our quality assurance team, which then enables us, like I say, to hopefully stop a problem before it starts. And as I've said, because of the way we'll be recording in Care Director and because of the changes in the use of the dashboard, it's going to mean that we're going to have improved performance monitoring, KPIs, etc. And we're setting them to give ourselves, to make sure that actually we're doing what's right for the adult. This isn't about us as individuals and how we can perform. Our performance needs to be done in the right way so that the adults are the ones who benefit out of this. To be able to make sure that everybody's having that decision made within the first 48 hours, a full decision, and that all further inquiries are made within a timely way. And as I say, if it needs a further inquiry, it's left assessed within 2 weeks is absolutely what we need to be doing. To make sure that everybody is getting the response that they need and that there are no delays. You'll hear me sort of switching language, and I've put use of language for me is really key here. We talk about safeguarding concerns, we talk about referrals, we talk about Section 42 inquiries. Now, to me, I can interchange them. It's what I do all day, every day. But for other teams, for other people, we need to be clear in the language that we use. We need to make sure people know what we're talking about. So when it's at different stages, everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet. Because without that, that's where we've had a lot of confusion. So, how many safeguarding concerns versus how many Section 42 inquiries? We want you and people in the members of the public to get the same information no matter who they talk to. So we can avoid some of that confusion and some of that concern that comes out. And that will then help us with making sure that we're clear on our decision rationales as to why we feel something is going forward for further inquiries. And lastly, for me, is that separation of duty. This is making SAST's role, so my very front-end team who deal with all of the referrals, their role really clear. What they've done before is do some further inquiries, they've done some on AS1s, and that's actually caused a lot of confusion as to what we do and what we don't do. So through discussions with colleagues in MPFT and also in ALDT, we've agreed that the decision, the initial decision, an initial inquiry plan is what SAST will do, that we won't do further inquiries at that stage. We will be making sure that the adult isn't immediately at risk. We will be ensuring that we've gathered sufficient information to know that there is an ongoing risk of abuse, that the adult has care and support needs. And beyond that, if we feel satisfied that they are an adult who has care and support needs and they are at continued risk of abuse or neglect, we will send that through to the relevant team for further inquiries. And that will help to make sure that that's really clear and help to simplify those processes out. And so far, that seems to be, because we've implemented that recently, so far that seems to be working well. Thanks, Helen. So, this is sort of the timeline. So just to give people an idea as to what we're trying to achieve at various time points. Whilst you all have a look at this, the one thing that I will talk about is you will notice actually, I haven't spoken at this point about changes in staffing level or put a slide on there about it. Now we have at the moment, as I've said, got a number of agency staff and we also have additional staff on secondment from MPFT. What we need is to making sure that we've got sufficient decision makers. There are qualified, experienced social workers to be able to manage this. Those people who have got experience of managing risk in the communities, and then also to be able to make decisions on what's sometimes quite limited information. So we have advanced practitioners. The team has been made up, as I've said, for the last 3 years of 4 full-time equivalent advanced practitioners. Through the transformation work, it has been identified that we require 3 additional members of the team on a permanent basis to be able to manage and effectively work. If you think at the moment we have over 400 concerns coming through each week, an advanced practitioner needs to be able to look at each one of those to be able to make a considered decision. 100 per week for an advanced practitioner is quite a significant amount. And also if you take into account resilience with regards to things like annual leave, etc. If we're working, which we have been over the summer, with only 2 advanced practitioners, that's where we start to build up delays and build delays up quite significantly. So through time and motion studies, we were able to identify that we would benefit from having the 3 additional members of the team, and that has already been approved. So that will, we are currently out to recruit for them. So hopefully that will improve things. But I just wanted to give you just a little bit of assurance, but my computer's just obviously locked as I've been talking, so just bear with me. As I've said, the changes that we've made, moving from the AS1 to the contact, was to improve our rate of closure. And that's not just to close things, it's to make sure that we're doing decisions in a timely way. What I've been noticing, and we've been monitoring the rate of closure since its inception at the start of July. And from closing approximately 48% of everything that came through within the week, we're now up to 88%, and that's rising by 10% each week. If we were to take into account some data that has just shown that they should have been closed, but the advanced practitioner hasn't closed it down correctly, we would actually be up to 92%. Now, we obviously need to be closing and dealing with 100%. But given the fact that over recent weeks we have been down in numbers because of annual leave, it's encouraging to know that we will soon be hitting that 100%, which will then mean that we will be ensuring that everybody's getting the response that they need on time. Now, again, I'll be open and honest with you all to say that at the moment we actually need to be closing more than 100%, because we do have a number waiting of work in progress that is historical in nature. We need to be closing more than 100% each week. So we are continuing to strive to improve on that and work ways that we can close more of that down. But I think for me, it's the encouragement in knowing that these changes that we've made look like they are going to make the difference that when we talked about it last year, we hoped it would. So hopefully by December, everything that we've spoken about will be in place, and we will be up and running with a full, touch wood, with a full quota of staff as well to be able to manage it. And as I say, hopefully at that point then we'll have the KPIs and everything will be in place, and we'll be able to monitor the systems more effectively. Thank you.
Ruth, thank you very much for that comprehensive run through this particular issue. It's a very sort of complex and challenging area of business, of course, isn't it? And it does have serious consequences if people get those decisions wrong, of course. So I think it's absolutely right that we do scrutinise that process to make sure that we are serving people, usually vulnerable people, I assume, who may present themselves to this council looking for help, to make sure that we do the right thing, of course. So, does anyone have any questions? Councillor Brenner.
Hi, Ruth. I was just, when you were going through in that, I was just conscious that some of the people in here may not know what certain adjectives mean, like SAST, MPTF and things like that. So can we sort of explain that firstly? Because
Certain. Yeah, I think that they are, I think they're written out on the slides, but MPFT is Midlands Partnership Foundation Trust, and you may all be aware they're the people we commission to complete the majority of our adult social care assessments and reviews for older people, people with physical disabilities and mental health as well. SAST is the Staffordshire Adult Safeguarding Team. That's my team based within the MASH, which is the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, and they deal with as I say, they manage all of the incoming concerns for adult safeguarding across the county. Was there another one? Oh yes, ALDT, thank you, is the Adult Learning Disability team, and that's part of the County Council. And ASAT is the Adult Safeguarding Inquiry Team. I sometimes forget how many there are. Adult Safeguarding Inquiry Team. We love an acronym, don't we? We're going to have to move away from it. The Adult Safeguarding Inquiry Team, that's my team based at police headquarters, and they manage complex and high-risk cases.
right. Then also, you know, on the challenging numbers, I noticed they only go up to 2020, and we're 9 months into the year now. Have we not got any more up-to-date figures than that?
Yes, I can obviously get that sent round. The numbers have continued to increase. And I'll have a look for them. So what I can say is that on a month-by-month basis, we have been receiving 1,500 concerns approximately every month since the start of this year. So the numbers do continue. We'll be reporting more formally coming up with regards to this year's figures.
Okay, thanks. And then lastly, the only other concern I've got, well, there's been in lockdown for so long enough, there's a lot of neglect out there that's been going on over the last 18 months. And how are we going to identify these and bring them to the forefront so we can get them sorted out? There's such a lot going on out there.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're absolutely right. The concern is always around sort of, as I would call it, hidden abuse, things that we might not be able to see. Obviously, as an organisation, we can only respond when circumstances are brought to our attention. However, what I would be saying is that in recent meetings, more agencies are now starting to go back out, certainly within care homes, etc. In fact, I had a meeting with CQC earlier on this morning, and they are completing far more visits, even to homes that actually were performing well prior to lockdown. When it comes to members of the public, what I would say is we are very reliant on some of our other agencies who may be going in, for example, district nursing services and also GPs as well, who may see people for other reasons and can identify concerns of neglect. I do think, though, exactly what you've said is reflected in our increasing numbers. And what we've also noticed is that for a number of families who are now able to go and visit loved ones again, they are seeing significant deterioration. Some of that, once we look into it, actually there aren't concerns of abuse and neglect, but actually what it is general deterioration, and when you haven't seen somebody for a year, that change can be quite stark. But what I would assure you all is that we look at each one of those that comes through and make sure that we make appropriate inquiries so that we can identify if there has been any abuse and neglect. My concern is more about how we move forward and ensuring that we've got good relationships with our providers who can still be quite reluctant to allow us in, citing potential health protection reasons for us not going in. So we work very carefully with people to make sure that we've got those good relationships so that we can get the most information that we can. And also by having those good working relationships with our partner agencies so we can triangulate information effectively and make the best decision that we can at the time.
Thank you. Councillor Mahal.
I think as a result of the pandemic, we're likely to see a significant increase in abuse and neglect by third parties on the individual, and self-neglect. And very broadly, the self-neglect should go through the Care Act assessment and get an assessment, and we'll see both, and those that are by a third party clearly need to go through safeguarding. And that's why the whole business of engaging with the organisations that refer to help them understand what's the most appropriate pathway is important, not just to manage our workload, but in order to get a quick service to the individual involved.
Thank you. Councillor Padeshi.
Thank you, Chair. There has been an acknowledgement that there has been a continual rise in referrals, and that at times it has gone out of our 2-week processing framework. In our report, we're told the processes, systems and paperwork haven't been reviewed for 4 years. And I'm wondering, Chair, whether, correct me if I'm wrong, if there is one, whether there needs to be a mechanism in place for us to have some sort of interim review, in which case we could well have the new posts that we're talking about in this report in place, and we could possibly have been in a better position to deal more effectively with the referrals and the concerns during the time of the pandemic. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. I also think perhaps the additional dashboard and performance indicators might, I assume we'll see some of that as that develops and moves forward.
I would certainly say you're absolutely right. Had some of this been looked at over the intervening years, we may not be in this position today. It isn't that nothing happened in the last 4 years. It's more that, unfortunately, I think there were other priorities felt at the time, and the team was managing relatively well. I think when you look back over time, this was inevitable, absolutely. And I know that there have been periods previously where we have raised the potential concern. However, at that time, there were other priorities for the local authority that then meant that because we were in a position where we were maintaining, that was acceptable. I think the changing face of certainly going forward, sometimes I think we get to points, don't we, where we realise that actually where we've tried to work in certain ways because it worked at certain times, it isn't then going to work that way in the future. So we tried to maintain certain things that were of benefit because it worked well without actually appreciating that impact, that the time it was taking to do some of those things on an ever-increasing referral rate coming through. And I think the pandemic has really allowed us some time to reflect around those elements. But I would absolutely agree, and I think I'd be really remiss to sit here and say, oh, it was all okay and this has come out of the blue. I think we had recognised there was changes needed. Some of the changes were difficult with our last computer system. That was the reality we were in. Some of the changes that we identified we needed, we couldn't implement until version 6 of Care Direct came into place. And other elements with regards to staffing and that, I think that can sometimes take time to understand the implication. We needed to do some time and motion studies around that. And as the Chair has already alluded to, going forward, we will be monitoring this far more closely. It's certainly something that this has made me realise the importance of having a really clear reporting system, being able to monitor things far more robustly and having a bit more detail, certainly around the delays at that very front end, to make sure that the wider work happens better, but absolutely.
Councillor Badeschi again.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, just very quick. I find it, and I'm not in
Councillor
any
Badeschi,
way...
I just wonder if you could bring your
Oh,
microphone down. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. I'm not in any way blaming Ruth here, but it's a bit of an indictment if we're being told that over and above safeguarding of our residents, that other issues took priority, Chair. I think that's something that should never be allowed to happen. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I do think there is an issue of prioritisation in all councils and all organisations. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the report. It's very comprehensive, and I'm pleased to see you sort of pulling it all together to make decisions as soon as possible with the people that have to use the service. Just to follow on from what was said by Councillor McMahon and yes, in relation to, we're probably missing a lot of people out of the system at the moment over the last 18 months because they've been isolating, etc. And of course, the first port of call normally, whether it be by the person that's suffering or a friend or a relative, is usually a doctor. Unfortunately, they haven't been able to get the doctors. I'm sorry, I've got to mention this. It's a bone of contention with me that you can't get a doctor's appointment. I think it's important that you work together, because if social and safeguarding is going to work, it's got to be the whole and not just parts of it. And I do think that we'll be seeing a lot more come forward that need care, adults, because of vulnerability. And I like the thought that you've got this where people can make decisions. This is another point I want to make. The decisions as soon as possible for the person that needs that safeguarding. Because there's nothing worse than sitting there waiting for something to happen by whoever, and it doesn't happen. You say you've got you're pulling together people to make decisions. I hope that that's going to be the case, that people can make decisions on the spot, on the spur of the moment, rather than have to bring it back to, as you say, rightly say, to meet with other officers to make a decision on one thing. It needs to be done ASAP, because that person obviously is in a crisis situation normally. So I'm pleased to see that you're pulling that together. I hope you get the teams pulled together that can do all of this and make these decisions to the most vulnerable of people out there. But thank you I'll watch this space with interest and see how it all pans out. Because as I've said before, just going back to the first point I made, normally it's the doctor that gives the first port of call to anything that's flags up, whatever happens with a patient, for the want of a better word. So I do have concerns about that. Just comments really, but you know, if you can answer any of the points I've raised, then thank you.
So working alongside our CCG colleagues, we are actually ensuring that we do have that good engagement with GPs. And one of the positive things that I would say, certainly over the last 3 or 4 years, is a much better engagement with GPs and a much clearer referral and rate coming through from them. Now, it'll be interesting, and I will need to go back and have a look to see whether I can do a comparative data on how many concerns GPs raised and whether we've seen any decrease in that over the last few months. So I can't actually say as to whether we've had that impact, but that's something that I will take away and have a look at. I certainly would agree that we need people to be able to make decisions, hence why, for me, the first port of call is the advanced practitioner. It doesn't go through, although obviously we have a contact centre who do take down the initial information, but that's passed through, and also they can speak directly to an advanced practitioner when they're taking the call if they've got questions. For me, it's absolutely clear, it's key that we have a decision maker at the front end who has the experience to be able to manage that and to be able to give that response as soon as possible. And so that is something, obviously, that we will continue to do, and it certainly isn't anything that I'm going to look at changing in our process or in our practice. I would just like to just go back to a point that you made with regards to self-neglect as well, if I can, which I think draws it in nicely. For me, it's about making the right decision at the earliest stage to get the person going down the right route within adult social care as soon as we can. If you've ever contacted somebody and then you've been passed from pillar to post going, oh no, it's not me, it's somebody else, or if you just call this number, by the time you get to that, people just go, I don't want to anymore. I've phoned enough people, I've had enough now, I'm not going to. I've had to wait 2 hours, I don't want to wait any longer, so I'm just not going to make the referral, I'm not going to phone with my concerns. So certainly with self-neglect, what I'd identified when I did an awful lot of auditing, I can't tell you how much auditing I've done recently, when I was looking through the number that we close at those very early stages, the vast majority of that was to do with self-neglect. And actually it wasn't even self-neglect, it was deterioration in somebody's needs, which isn't self-neglect. It's a change in somebody's care needs, where, as Councillor McMahon has already alluded to, they require an assessment. They need support. They don't need a safeguarding inquiry, but our process meant that they had to come via my team, first of all, for a decision to be made, to then go back out, to go back to first contact, to then go back out to the district teams. So it was very, very circular. So what we've done and what we're implementing is to take that out so that actually if it's self-neglect or deterioration, rather than it coming firstly to safeguarding, it goes first to the district teams for that assessment of need, which actually follows our policy and also our process far more correctly than was happening. That doesn't mean that if after that assessment people are, significantly concerned about self-neglect, it can't come in. Just that that person will get the right response at the right time. So we're working, particularly with our health colleagues, to make sure that they make the referral as an assessment of need rather than as a concern of safeguarding. I think there's a bit of a misapprehension or misinformation potentially that if you put it through as safeguarding, it's going to be dealt with quicker, but actually it can sometimes slow the correct response down. So by working with our health colleagues around that, who are the people who identify that more frequently, we should then be able to slow that down. I will just make a further comment. I think just with regards to the historical things, I obviously don't want to do my county council too much of a disservice either. What I would say is that at those times there were other things, for example, ensuring we had appropriate assessment pathways into the county council which weren't effective for a period of time, and that was where the priority sat. 2 years ago, my service was running relatively efficiently and effectively, and so services, people's response was there. So I do understand where you're saying, where you come from, because for me, safeguarding is what I do and it's my priority every day. However, the balance was required at that time. So I wouldn't want that to be seen that we were in a terrible position 2 years ago that was ignored by my senior leadership team, because I think that would be a misrepresentation.
No, I think that's a point well made. Thank you. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chairman. It's been mentioned already that the existing policies and processes have not been reviewed for some considerable time. Can we have some assurance that the new process that you're doing will be reviewed perhaps annually or whatever the case would be? And secondly, when we talk about the key performance indicators, I think it's really important that as a committee we see those regularly to enable us to establish whether the increase in capacity that you're going to have has actually made a difference. And equally, if it's not, whether or not there needs to be more resource put into the place to make sure that we do get the numbers down and that the caseloads are not too demanding for the team members that you bring on board, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
I think you're absolutely right. So I will be looking at ensuring that there are regular reviews. Certainly over these early stages, I'm reviewing all of the data weekly. And going forward, I'll be ensuring that we were reviewing initially for the first 3 months over the first year, following the implementation of all of the changes, and then hopefully annually after that, as long as we can see that the changes are in place. I would be more than happy to share however frequently this committee would like to see the data. I will, be happy to share that. I certainly have, you know, have nothing to, you know, to hide in that respect. I would much rather people have really good awareness and so can challenge and can offer those points of challenge at the earliest opportunity. I would say I'm in this all of the time, and actually it's really helpful to have other people looking at it, making sure that what we're doing is absolutely seen to be the right thing to do. And I would offer the assurance for me, I want to get this right, not for me as an individual, but for the adults. And I don't want to be in a position where I sit here knowing we could have done things differently and didn't. For me, that is, if things go wrong and I think I've done everything that I can in the position I'm in to ensure the best service for adults, that's something. If I'm sat here thinking, I know we should have done more and we didn't, that to me is where we've got the problem. And some of you might have worked with me for longer than others, but I really genuinely care about getting this right. And if any of, you know, any comments or anything, any information that comes to you from your constituents and also from your wider work that can inform how we manage and how we work, that would be gratefully received. Because as has already been said, we have to work together to achieve safeguarding for adults in our community. It's not just for one organisation, certainly not for one team to be able to manage that. And if there is anything that we can do to support our wider community, then obviously we'd welcome the opportunity.
Thank you for that. I think we would all welcome sight of those performance indicators at the appropriate time, of course, and perhaps we can have a look at putting that in the work programme as we move forward. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to take up Councillor Pardesi's point. And if everybody, the term safeguarding gives one the impression that everybody who is at risk in the community ought to go to safeguarding. But actually those who have a Care Act assessment are at risk because they're vulnerable. Those who referred to the Adult Learning Disability Team are at risk because they have difficulties in managing their affairs and the like. Safeguarding is only a part of the whole process of this county doing its best to keep people safe. That's why over the last few years we've concentrated on those areas where we felt the difficulties lay in keeping the bulk of our people safe. That doesn't mean to say we did it perfectly, because no system is perfect. We are conscious of the fact that we've got to look in several directions, including safeguarding, because safeguarding is all about third parties abusing or neglecting individuals. And there's far more about risk, and there's far more about keeping people safe than that. And we're responsible for all that, in conjunction with other statutory organisations. Councillor Parry's position on primary care is well made. It is the case that successive governments of all colours have found it very difficult to challenge primary care and make it a successful and real difference. Primary care was undoubtedly in crisis. It's been so. I came to the conclusion it definitely was after when the contract changed in 2003, but I was pretty suspicious that it was prior to that. And as regards the KPIs that Councillor Wilcox mentions, I think, and the Chair, I think this is absolutely right. For me, scrutiny is about the fact these are difficult, complex issues, and the more brains we've got sitting around the table to challenge and to help, the better. This is a non-partisan way of really addressing the issues and putting challenge into the system, which all systems need, irrespective of how good or otherwise they are. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Just a couple of questions I thought as well, and I think following on from what we were saying about it being a complex and challenging area of business, and also the fact that this council has in recent years been criticised, usually around child safeguarding. The big criticism is that we don't understand the threat and risk picture because of that complex nature. And I assume that adult safeguarding is probably the same, maybe even more complex. Having said that, when we talk about this increase in numbers, and the report suggests that it may be just down to awareness, I wonder, is that good enough? Because if we are going to make a difference and tackle some of these complex and challenging issues, isn't there an argument that says that we should understand the threat and risk picture and not just assume it's down to people being more aware that they can use a service? I noted that earlier you were talking about a review that you'd carried out, and the majority, I think you said, was not self-harm, self-neglect, I think, wasn't it? Yeah. I just wonder whether we have anything in place that gives us that better and richer picture around what this increase is about, because it's very difficult to use reduced resources and finance and money going on to the point about how do we make sure that we do catch all of these people that might be vulnerable. Is it acceptable that we just assume that a 60% increase is down to people becoming more aware? Should we have more scrutiny around what that looks like?
I think you make a very good point, and I know regionally, so with my regional colleagues, it's something that we do discuss. Because the national picture is telling us all the same thing, I think the problem is trying to understand why it keeps going up. So as you start to look at it, it's not like we've got a particular concern in a particular area. The more I look at our information, sometimes the less it becomes obvious as to why we get the increase. I would say it is around greater awareness, because my concern before was that actually people didn't perceive what was happening as being neglectful or abuse. And now people recognise that adults who maybe are not being taken to hospital appointments, who maybe aren't receiving sufficient drinks during the day, that this is actually neglect, which previously it was felt, well, you know, they're in a care home, or, you know, they're receiving care at home. So I think there seems to be there is the recognition. I actually think, for me, what we need to be looking at then is that if it is recognition, we then need to be ensuring that if people are recognising abusive practice or neglectful practice, that how are they addressing it to assure that it doesn't happen. So for me, it's about us addressing the root cause of some of those problems, which is the quality of care that people are provided, the difficult positions that we sometimes leave adults in that places them at risk of abuse and neglect. And for me, then, there's a whole system response required to that, has already been suggested as well. I think it is something we need to continue to review, so we don't just always make assumption, and I would agree with you on that point. And I know that there is now far greater national studies into it than there ever has been. And again, that's been prompted by the pandemic and the awareness of the vulnerability of adults in our community. So hopefully, over the coming years, and I've been involved in a number of studies for people as well, for various universities, we will start to get some of that data, some of that information, which I think will then assist us as a local authority to have a better idea as to what's actually occurring in our communities. Does that help to answer?
Yes, thank you for that. I do think, you know, I'm sure sort of 5 years ago, a lot of people would never heard of sort of sexual exploitation, criminal exploitation, the slavery, modern slavery. So you would expect, wouldn't you, and the prevent agenda around terrorism, of course, you would expect as those things move forward, people do become aware. And I suppose the point I'm trying to make is, are we picking up any of that? Because if this increase in any respect is due to those things, there are other agencies that can help reduce some of that particular threat. I also think when we talk, and the report talks about how we could become more proactive, I don't understand the detail of the work, but I assume that a lot of people will present in a crisis situation. And perhaps there may well be serial users of the service that we can work with because we know what the problem is and therefore reduce the demand. But we presumably will still need to have a reactive part of this process. And also, I think when you look at the report and paragraphs 5 to 9, set out a strong argument that actually it's working really well. I think you talked about 88% of closures looking to 100% of closures. And also the fact that you make about only a small proportion of people do need all of that extra help. Is there an argument there about we ought to be reviewing the process as opposed to the people that administer it? Because if a lot of that process results in little or no action, then could we not be prioritising our resources around some of those really challenging issues that come up?
I'll take your last point first, if that's okay, just in relation to the process. What I would say is, based on Section 42 of the Care Act, we have a duty as a local authority to make inquiries where it is felt that an adult who has care and support needs is at risk of abuse and neglect. Those inquiries can be as little as a conversation, one conversation. Those early things that we do is the bread and butter of adult social, from a safeguarding point of view. So whilst, yes, I think you're right, we have looked at our processes to streamline that, to make sure that we're not making that so we can deal with all of those concerns that come through, which we have to, by law, look into, because that's what the Care Act tells us to do. And so we have to do that. But what we need to be doing is making sure that where things need the time, that there is the time there to spend on it. That's, to me, why my team, SAST, is incredibly important, to look and being able to make those initial calls to establish as to whether there is that ongoing risk of abuse and neglect before we just send things out for inquiry. And that's what we do, so that when things go out to the district teams who do those more complex, who look into things where we've got a more pervasive concern, that actually then they can have the time to be able to do that, because they're not dealing with the other 80% that actually can be dealt with through 1 or 2 telephone calls. So I'd say from that point, that to me is almost our bread and butter.
Thank you. Just the last point I would make. I think in one of the slides, top-level transformation activity, you talk about separation of duty, and I think that we've heard a lot this morning, and I think some of the words that used about being proactive, cohesive, and even intuitive decision-making. From my experience, when you make distinctions between teams, especially when some of those decisions are nuanced, is there a danger that then you increase the opportunity for people to fall through gaps because certain teams will say that's not us, it's someone else? And I think you make the distinction between the SAST team and the district teams. Are we satisfied that the nuance of that decision making will be prioritised and maintained? Because it just strikes me that making distinctions between teams, from my experience, doesn't always have the outcome of making the service more holistic in its delivery.
I actually think, for me, we made this change this time to stop exactly that from happening. What had been happening, as I say, is we did, I'm going to talk a bit of shop here. We did AS1s and we did AS2s. We made initial decisions and we did planning discussions at SAST. So when we then sent out a decision for a planning discussion to an area team, they'd send it back to us and go, well, why aren't you doing this one? You did the last one. Are you going to do this one? So we spent a lot of time with work going backwards and forwards. So what we've done is made the decision that SAST is going to make all of the initial decisions, which actually gives us consistency and hopefully prevents people falling through those gaps. Because actually, when we were sending things out, say, to mental health for them to make their own decisions on it, those were at the points where things potentially could have gotten through and slipped through the gap. By it all coming into one central point, at least that very initial decision-making stage, I can say we're comfortable that that decision is going to be made and that those people aren't going to slip through that net. The other part of that, though, is that we need to make sure that that other agencies as well are happy and are going to be picking up work to be able to do that. So that is ongoing work to make sure that, say, CCGs are completing inquiries where it's most appropriate for them to do so, and other agencies are doing likewise. So that's ongoing work to offer that support, because absolutely the last thing that I want is to cause, or the last thing that we want is for people to be missed because people aren't aware of where their responsibility is.
Yes, Chair, you asked for other reasons as to why there was a possible rise in referrals. Well, Chair, it doesn't help if we're cutting our drug and alcohol abuse services. It doesn't help if we are taking too long in sorting out support for mental health issues. It doesn't help if we are closing places like youth centres and children's centres where, as Ruth quite rightly says, we can prevent people from falling through the net and issues being identified and nipped in the bud. So when we need to heed more the warnings that when we're cutting services, we need to think carefully, because we could well be creating problems that are far worse in the future. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you for that. Is there any other questions? No. Thank you, Ruth, for taking the questions and taking the time to talk us through that report. I do think it's hugely encouraging that we are moving forward in this way. And actually, I think we do look forward to seeing some of those performance indicators. So hopefully, we are moving forward. Councillor McMahon, I don't know if you wanted to say anything in conclusion or not.
Only we're grateful for this. It's been helpful. And we look forward to bringing back the KPIs, actually, and you talking through them and challenging us on them, because that's what this is about. And we're very grateful to you this morning. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. We'll move on to the last of the reports. Is it you again, Ruth?
I believe it is me again. You get a lot of me today. You know, you can have too much, Ruth, that's what I say. Okay, so this report, I haven't actually got a presentation for this. I am sorry. The reason why I chose not to do a presentation for this one is actually because I don't have much more to say than actually what's written in the report. This was something that was asked to be brought because obviously there's always a concern about, as it has already been spoken about, people who maybe fall just outside of the need for statutory services, where actually they have a lot of contact with various statutory agencies through various different means and because of different circumstances. Quite often this relates to people who are termed as having maybe a chaotic lifestyle. So maybe have a number of contacts with health colleagues and certainly with police colleagues as well. These will be people who maybe get referred into adult safeguarding, but who don't necessarily have care and support needs that prevent them from being able to protect themselves. There is a big move around the country in regards to forums being set up to manage risk associated with people in these circumstances. Our close neighbours, Stoke-on-Trent, have a system already in place that has been seen to provide an appropriate forum to discuss risks and to take actions where statutory agencies don't necessarily have the responsibility to respond. For me, this paper is to give some consideration as to whether in Staffordshire we need to be looking wider at times than our statutory responsibilities. This doesn't mean that it's for the local authority to take the responsibility or even to take the lead in this. I would say in many counties it's either the police or actually community engagement groups who lead in these areas, and actually it may better sit within one of those organisations. In Stoke-on-Trent, it's actually a charity who organises and runs what is known as the MARG. And actually that then gives people a more even footing and then helps to share the risk. So it's seen as a positive for it not to be led by the local authority. I, however, would say a number of these people who fall just outside of care now are likely to come into contact and require care in the future. So actually, if we can work proactively, again, that word, with people earlier on, we may actually prevent and reduce, which is the other part of our duty as a local authority, the need for services in the future. So I wouldn't want us to sit here and think we have to, that we don't have to do it because it's not statutory, but what I don't want us also to think is that this is something that we have to take the lead in, just as to whether it's something that we would be supportive of should other agencies continue to engage. I would add that this is something that's being monitored by the Adult Safeguarding Board for Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent, and this has come up at the last two boards that they've had with regards to people who fall just outside of the care system. So I think for me, this is more your reflections, for me to get an understanding as well as to where your communities, for your constituents, the potential implications of this, so that we can see as to maybe what next steps we want to look at taking. So that's a lot less me talking, isn't it, this time? Thank you, Chair.
Now, thank you for that. Are there any other questions? Just a couple, really, from me then. Again, thank you for the report. And again, another complex area, certainly of those people that don't meet that requirement around that statutory care. But and there must be quite a volume of them, certainly from my previous experience, I seem to remember. One of the, just a couple of points really, is that the report itself talks vaguely about, we haven't scoped it out, Staffordshire doesn't know if it wants to do it yet, the police aren't sure. And going back to the points that were made from the previous report, and I hate to sound like a scratch record here, but you know, this council has been criticised in the past for failing to recognise what the threat and risk picture is, and there is undoubtedly a threat and risk picture around vulnerable young people, particularly those that don't meet a criteria. So to all intents and purposes, and I know it says in the report here that some of the agencies feel isolated in their response to this. So it does feel to me like, we need to understand it. I accept that it will come with the need for other agencies to join in. And I also think that there's a role for this committee here to raise the necessity for this sort of work with other scrutiny panels, because like you, I don't think it is a local authority role. I do think it's very much a partnership role, and actually trying to manage some of this, because whilst we can offer support, I'm sure all the agencies do, what I have been interested in seeing nationally is that a lot of, I say a lot, I've made the judgment there, but of the documents that I've read, what seems to be good practice at the moment is that some local authority partnerships are using the language of disruption, which suggests that once we reach a stage whereby we cannot be offering that level of support, then actually there's still a threat and risk picture that needs to be managed. And I understand the government have even produced a disruption toolkit for use by the agencies. I haven't seen any mention of that in the report. I do think it's something that perhaps this council should consider with its partners, because quite rightly so, as you were talking about that myriad of things that present the threat and risk to this group of vulnerable people, that actually people like the police may well be better placed, and housing, of course, better placed to use a disruption tactic against the people who are causing this threat and risk to vulnerable people. So I think I welcome the report. I do think it needs us to have some more work and more conversations with other scrutiny panels. I know that we have a meeting next week with the Commissioner's Office and various other people around our community approaches. And I do think this seems to fit quite well into that agenda. So I'll be working with officers to make sure that we take that forward and drive that forward. I just feel slightly uncomfortable that as a council we haven't yet made our mind up about whether we want to scope it out, and other agencies aren't quite on board. And I do think that we need to be doing more than that, if I'm honest. So I don't know if there's any other questions. Yeah. Councillor Bennett.
Just a quick question, really. We've got a lot of adults that are on the cusp of care. Some of them that think they don't need care, the families think they do, and we have this ongoing scenario. But a lot of them don't even know where to go to get help in the first place. A lot of things have gone digital now, and there's a lot of these people who are on the cusp of care who are not digital at all, and their sons and daughters who will help them to get this care, and that they also aren't digital yet. So how can we ensure that we're not missing these people? Thanks.
I think that's, it is always a concern, and I would share your concern about the use of digital. As I alluded to, it's not really my comfort zone. So thank heavens that I've got a 14-year-old most of the time. That's what I think. I think we have to keep ensuring that we are engaging as much as we can with other people, so that we are looking at those different ways. There's still nothing wrong with a good old-fashioned leaflet, is there? Or with a poster up in a relevant, community place. I use, GP surgeries, libraries, to make sure that people know where they can go to get support. For some people as well, actually, their lack of engagement with services, as you said, because they choose not to, is almost a different, it's almost a different way of looking at things. And I take some of the comments. I'm so sorry, I keep forgetting your name. It's Councillor Paletti, sorry, my apologies, was saying earlier about the changes in some of the services that we no longer offer, or that we offer limited services in, which does sometimes place people at greater risk of falling into that cusp of care. We don't have potentially the same level of engagement with them. However, what I would say is the Chair has already alluded to, by working closely with our other organisations, hopefully we will be able to look at those people that we're missing, those people that actually we don't currently have the contact with, and look at those different community groups to enable us to be able to facilitate some conversation or some dialogue in the best way possible. What we need to ensure we don't do is close ourselves off to some of those different ways of engaging with people. Not everything needs to be done through an app on your phone. Although, if you go to Ticketmaster, they will only send you a ticket via your mobile phone now, which my mother contacted me about last night because she doesn't have a mobile phone. So I had to order her tickets. Oh, bless her. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I'll go back to this interesting development nationally around using disruption tactics. But I think following on from that question, what it also does is not only finds those people that we do think need our help, but also it helps protect those multiple victims that are probably invisible to all the agencies in deciding that actually we take the challenge to the people who are creating the threat and risk. I think Councillor McMahon, you wanted a word.
I'm keen on this. The disruption piece reminds me of the whole Joseph Schumpeter bit, the Austrian economist who talked about creative disruption. Disruption. And disruption can be quite creative in terms of the outcomes. And I think that's very interesting. Ultimately, this is about breaking down silos for those who are under the radar. And breaking down silos can be hugely powerful. I wonder whether as well as simply looking at what other folk are doing, is looking at the outcomes of what other folk are doing. Because I can imagine, and we're in a similar position, where the idea of doing something that's not a statutory requirement under in the middle of a pandemic, when there's so much to do, is not something that's particularly attractive. And whether looking at what other authorities have done and found that it streamlines things, it reduces the workload, as well as addressing a risk, would be really helpful, and it may well encourage others in our community to come on board. Sorry, I feel like I'm a scrutinizer there, but
Scrutinise away. No, I think that's a really good suggestion. I do know that there are certainly the one over in Derbyshire, which has been in place for some time, has actually produced reports around actually what it's achieved and where it's felt the outcomes have happened for people. So it may be something that, again, as I would be seeing, sort of scoping work, that would be part of it, wouldn't it? We'd be looking at the ways that we work and actually what the outcomes have been and actually how it's benefited people overall. I would share, sort of just from my point of view, that for me this is something of interest to me personally and professionally, I should say as well, because I do think that a lot of people who sit on the cusp of care end up coming into care in maybe not at that time, but certainly at a future date, and there are a number of agencies I think we can utilise and support to ensure that we get better outcomes for our communities, and certainly for some of our younger people who have just recently, come into adulthood, where actually for some people they've had some very difficult times. That means that adulthood doesn't come as easily to them as others.
No, thank you for that. I think it's one of those things that certainly we can take forward. I think, and it would be right and appropriate for us to do. I think we need to perhaps have a conversation with the vice chairs about how we create some of those work streams together with officers, so we can at least have a look at that, and taking Councillor McMahon's point, how we mould that and change it for the threatened risk picture here in Staffordshire. If there's no other questions, then can I just say a huge thank you for you to sit there on your own taking all of these questions about these reports. I found it really helpful and useful, and I'm sure the rest of the Scrutiny Committee have as well. So thank you very much. You're actually free to go if you wanted to make a run for the door.
Thank you ever so much, and thank you for having me here today. And please never hesitate in making contact with me should you have any questions or queries about the work that we're doing in adult safeguarding. Thank you.
Item 6 then, the work programme. Helen, could you, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it?
I think it is, yes, Chairman. So the next meeting is on the 4th of November. So you've actually got October off, which I think is the first month where we haven't had a meeting, isn't it, since we started. And that will be a children's-based meeting, and we're looking at the McAllister report, and we've got the Children's Safeguarding Annual Report coming to that meeting as well. Yeah. We have, just to let you know where we are with the sexual harassment in schools, which was discussed in, at the first meeting and included on the work programme in July. We're doing a spotlight piece of work on that, if you remember, but it wasn't just this scrutiny committee that had put that forward. It was also put forward by Health and by Prosperous. So we have one member from each. Mrs. Perry is the member sitting on that from this committee. We are looking at, we're hoping to have the spotlight meeting in October, but we're just looking for dates and making sure we've got the right people in the room. So we'll be able to report back on that soon, hopefully. I think, unless anyone has any further questions, I think the rest is fairly self-explanatory. You've got the January meeting penciled in. We need to put something extra in the February and the April, but clearly you've got a number of items there that we haven't actually allocated yet. So that's where we are at the moment.
Thank you for that. I think members will recall that we had some suggestions of additional things that should go in here, and I think that's quite right, that we bring some of those pressing issues to us. We're still working our way through that process, and please bear with us, because it is valuable time, and I'm not prioritising, well, I am prioritising it, also trying to prioritise what we actually put on this work programme. But I do think that we need to have a clear objective about what we're trying to achieve around bringing some of these issues and reports to this committee, as opposed to them just being a talking shop. I do think that we need to have something that we can add some value to the council's processes by doing it. And it would appear from this morning's discussion we might even have 2 more things that we want to have a look at that I think are important. If there's any questions on the work programme, then please shout up. If not, what I was going to ask is the 2 vice chairs, if you have 10 minutes just after this meeting so we can just get our heads together about what the programme is going to look like as we move forward. There's no other exclusion of the public issues or anything else. So that brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance, and thank you for the questions as well. It's always a bit tense if I sit here and no one ever else asks any questions. So thank you for that. I think this morning's been really helpful. Thanks. Bye-bye.